Hey everyone, NoCad and Aquita here. This is going to be a slightly different kind of video. I'm going to be talking about Dragon Ball FighterZ, which just released this past Friday as of time of recording. It's currently Wednesday as I'm recording this. This shouldn't go up until the Monday after recording it, so right now it's been less than a week since the game dropped. It'll have been about a little more than a week by the time this is uploaded and you can hear it. And I have not finished the game as of yet. This is not a "so I just finished," this is not a final thoughts review type of video. This is explicitly my preliminary thoughts early into the game's lifespan, having played through part of it and gone a few rounds with a friend of mine. I just really want to talk about FighterZ. For two reasons. One, it's a current hot button issue in the video game world. It's very relevant. A lot of people are likely to click on this video, and you know, I am nothing if not a whore for clicks. Please just spooge your clicks all over my face. And two, the game is just fucking fantastic, as most Arc System Works games tend to be, and I really want to just push this momentum that the game has been getting, because it has been getting some pretty fucking high degree of notoriety among not just the FGC, but in the video game and anime community in general. It's the combination of a really well-made, well-put-together, solid fighting game with this really strong IP of Dragon Ball Z that has led to this being ArcSys' first sort of mainstream hit. A lot of their games that they've made in the past have been pretty niche. You know, anime fighters are not the most prevalent genre in terms of what's played. If you look at sort of the hardcore fighting games community, a lot of them are trending more towards things like Street Fighter, things like Tekken 7 if they're into the 3D fighters, things like, even if they're looking for something with more of an anime style to it, they're probably trending more towards SNK games like KOF and whatnot than your average anime air dasher. You don't see a lot of these types of, this specific style of fighting game on stage at big tournaments like EVO and whatnot, because it's just generally a less popular style than a more traditional fighter like your Street Fighters, or a more grounded fighter like your KOFs that's grounded as in on the ground, not grounded as in realistic. But yeah, these anime air dashers, which are a lot of what Arc System Works make, are very much, as the name of the subgenre might imply, more heavily focused on the air game, keeping moving and kind of air dashing back and forth. Most characters have double jumps, all that kind of stuff. And the other half of it is that a lot of them are also what would be considered hyper fighters, where it's very much about managing your meter and pulling off big combos, and comboing is a lot easier in this type of game than it would be in, say, Street Fighter, but that's because of the fact that it is much more required. Like, if you look at the average hyper fighter, be it Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, or Dragon Ball FighterZ, or whatever other example you want to throw up there, any of the Marvel vs. Capcoms, really, they're very much heavily focused on building large combos because you want to get as much damage off of that hit as possible, because you can count on the fact that your opponent will. But to balance out the fact that combos are borderline required, they're a lot easier to execute than they are in a more traditional type of fighter. In a game like Street Fighter, you're usually going to have combos that follow a very specific pattern and have very specific input timing required to pull them off. Certain moves can combo into certain other moves, but most moves cannot combo into each other by default, and that is not at all the case in these sorts of games. Or I guess rather, it sort of is, but in a more intuitive way. Because in your average hyper fighter, this definitely holds true for both Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Dragon Ball FighterZ. You can actually really easily chain together moves just by following a basic chain of light to heavy strikes with resets in the form of launches and that sort of thing, so that you can go light, medium, heavy, launch them into the air, follow them up there, go light, medium, heavy up there, use cancel into a special, light, medium, heavy, whatever you want to do, depending on what specific special you're using. Obviously, I'm kind of oversimplifying this for the sake of making it understandable to anybody who isn't intimately familiar with fighting games, but the point is, combos are a lot simpler and a lot smoother and a lot easier. It's also worth noting that they require much, much less precise timing than a more traditional fighter would for the same type of combos. And as a result, a new player will start off very easily picking up 5-10 hit combos without too much difficulty because it's kind of autopiloted. I mean, in the case of Dragon Ball FighterZ, it's literally autopiloted. You can just mash the light attack button and it'll give you a combo, and you can mash medium attack and it'll give you a combo ending in a super. But even if you are doing actual manual combos, it is like borderline autopilot because all you really got to do is just hit light, medium, heavy, and then reset with something in between. It's only when you start getting into the really extreme combos where you're keeping your opponent airborne and out of their own control for just exorbitant amounts of time and getting, 50, 60 hits in and dealing like 2/3 of their health bar in damage that things start getting really difficult to keep up with in terms of the execution barrier. And this sort of approach to how combos are done, having them be borderline mandatory but also easier to do than in other games, I think results in a sort of contradiction in terms of how the games are viewed. This is definitely something that I experienced before I started really getting into Hyper Fighters. When I looked at a game like Marvel vs. Capcom 3, or like Skullgirls, or now like Dragon Ball FighterZ, I kind of assumed that I probably wasn't going to have much success with it, being somebody who is more experienced with Street Fighter and games that were significantly less combo intensive. Because I'm not very good at combos, I'm just not great at getting the muscle memory for those sorts of very precise inputs down correctly. And so I figured this game is entirely about getting big combos on your opponent and dealing as much damage off of any hit as possible. There's no way I can do this. And as it turns out, I was completely fucking wrong, because again, combos are so much easier in these games. This is something that I discovered just recently when I got Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 on Steam, having not touched that game since I was like 12 and didn't even know any goddamn thing about fighting games. And in the meantime, I just kind of assumed, like, yeah, Marvel vs. Capcom probably not something I was ever going to be successful at anyway, but it came out on PC and I picked it up again and found that actually it's really easy to do the combos for the reasons that I mentioned before. So there's kind of a paradox going here where there are actually these very accessible types of fighting games if you enter with the right mindset, but because of the way that they are set up, it makes them seem inaccessible, because it's easy to do these combos, but they look complicated, and they look difficult, and they look intimidating, and they'll scare off a lot of players who are less confident in their execution. But Dragon Ball FighterZ has managed to overcome that in the form of just having a really fucking strong IP that it's tied to that will pull in lots and lots and lots of casual players who don't know what the fuck's going on, but they'll fucking learn because they love Dragon Ball. So Arc System Works is kind of getting some momentum off of this. This was a big tangent to get to the point of just Arc System Works is finally getting some goddamn momentum for once in their life, and they deserve it, obviously, because they've been making fantastic games for years that just unfortunately had the handicap of being in a specific subgenre of fighting game that not a lot of high-level players really play a whole lot of in terms of at tournaments and whatnot, and not a lot of low-level players are even feel confident enough to take up. But they finally got in there. They got one in, and it's looking great. Everybody seems to be loving it. It's selling really well. I mean, this game is so successful that for the entirety of the first day that it released, I could not get an online match because every single fucking lobby was completely full at all times. And this game has continued to have issues with just ridiculous server load because there have been so many fucking people who bought and are playing it, and that is a great problem to have. That is a fantastic problem for a fighting game to have. And I just hope that Arc System Works can keep this momentum up, and I want to try to like contribute to that in my own little way. Obviously, not a lot of people watch my videos, but anything I can do to get the word out about how this game is great, I want to, because it really is absolutely fantastic. It is such a fully featured and tight and just polished fighting game. I mean, first of all, you've got tons of content. It's crazy how much content there is here. It's got a really good tutorial that will teach you all the basics of the gameplay. It's got your standard combo challenge mode where it just says, hey, here's a useful combo, see if you can pull it off here in training, and then maybe take it into the actual fight with you. That might be helpful. It's got a few different types of arcade mode, and they're actually like much more in-depth of a mode than you would usually get with an arcade mode. Usually the way an arcade mode works is just, you fight a bunch of dudes in a row, and either you fight them in a fixed order, or maybe you can choose the order somewhat, or maybe the order is somewhat random. But in the case of Dragon Ball FighterZ, each arcade mode, which are of differing lengths, have this whole like bracket list that you progress your way through, and who you end up fighting depends on how close you come to losing each fight. The closer you come to losing a fight, the more easy of an opponent you'll be paired up against in the next fight. Obviously there will be this continuous increase in difficulty because it is still moving on to the next level, but it will be more extreme if you do better in your earlier fight, and who you end up at and who you finish off at the end of the game will, among other things, determine what rank you get. It's really in-depth and kind of out there for an arcade mode, and it's not something that I've really seen in any other game that I can think of. And it's just an example of how they didn't need to put that much effort into it. They could have just made a standard arcade mode and nobody would have held that against them because it's a fucking arcade mode. It only needs to be what it is. But they did put that effort in because Arc System Works care. They put a ton of effort into this game, and it really shows. I mean, it's got 3 different fucking story modes to go through, all of which have their own little plots and whatnot, and have a certain degree of actual cinematography and direction in regards to the cutscenes. Not a huge amount, mind you. We are still working with in-game assets and a basic visual novel style of cutscene, but there's actual animation going on here as opposed to character portraits. There's more visually on display than there usually would be in a story mode in a fighting game. And there's obviously more in terms of plot than a lot of fighting games are also willing to offer you, because this is a Dragon Ball game, of course. Aside from that, you got lots of different options in terms of what kinds of online and local play you can do. You can go and do ranked matches or casual matches just through online matchmaking, or you can go and fight arena or ring matches with people in your lobby. And there are kind of subtle differences between these, where an arena match is sort of an exhibition thing where you can have people spectating it and it's this big thing in the middle of the lobby, whereas a ring match is more of like a personal little bracket that you set up yourself and just have people come in and join in, and people can still spectate that, but it's kind of a smaller idea, you know. I mean, obviously either way you're going to be fighting someone online, that's going to still be the basic gist of it, but it's almost like there's different tiers of what you're going for, and even though it doesn't affect the actual fight itself, it does sort of affect how you look at it, you know? It's just nice that there are these options, because this kind of thing it kind of creates context for the fight and gives it a different feel, even if it doesn't actually change the mechanics at play. Speaking of mechanics, there's fucking tons of them, and they're really fucking accessible. I mean, first off, you got your throw and your dragon rush, both of which would require 2 face buttons to be pressed simultaneously, can both be done with 1 button, and obviously that's a very great accessibility feature for people who are new to fighting games and aren't used to having to push 2 buttons at a time and can't really do that smoothly. You've got very, very generally useful moves that can be used to close distances, to just really get in there and do what you need to do. I mean, you've got a lot of options for getting in. You can dash in, you can air dash in, you can super dash in, that's one of those just hit a single button and it'll take you up to the enemy. Now that is actually pretty unsafe. It's very punishable if you're up against someone who knows what they're doing, which means that it's basically just a crutch for new players that they will eventually have to grow out of, but it's there. It's a nice thing to have, and it is still a generally useful mechanic in certain scenarios, just a lot more situationally than certain others. If you press B and Y together, then you can actually just teleport behind your opponent at the expense of 1 meter of your key. All kinds of stuff. You've just got ridiculous amounts of options for getting in, many of which are very accessible to new players. It's very clear that a lot of time and thought was put into making a game that has a very low skill floor compared with a lot of other fighting games that a lot of people will be able to easily get into, while also maintaining a nice high skill ceiling so that people who really dig into the mechanics and find the tech and figure out what kind of bullshit they can pull will be rewarded for doing so, which is very, very important, not just in competitive games in general, because obviously you want to have as low a skill floor as possible so that people can get that foot in the door, and then you want to have a nice high skill ceiling so that the competitive players will feel like they have a reason to be that competitive. And, you know, that's just generally good advice. But it's especially important for specifically a Dragon Ball game because, again, it's a very strong IP that is going to be pulling in a lot of more casual players who don't know the first fucking thing about fighting games. They don't know any of it, and that's not their fault. They just haven't had the opportunity to be interested in one of these games before. So having a game like this that interests them and which will actually help them get their foot in the door and will help teach them how to play fighting games is massively important. I cannot overstate how great that is. That is the absolute perfect way to handle this IP, and it's something that really no other game in the Dragon Ball franchise has ever done, I think. I mean, there have been some that have come closer. The Budokai games were pretty solid fighters that had a decently high skill ceiling and a fairly low skill floor, but really not to this level. They don't play as well, they don't have as much tech available, and they're not quite as easy to get into as FighterZ is. FighterZ is really just kind of the perfect Dragon Ball game as far as I can tell right here, so I really do hope that Arc System Works, having finally gotten a bit of mainstream recognition for the tireless work that they have put into making beautiful, polished fighting games for years now, can really turn this into some proper momentum and rocket their way to the top of this genre, because it is where they deserve to be. They are significantly better than most of their competitors in the genre. I mean, you know, Tekken 7 is a pretty good game. It's not really my cup of tea. I'm not that big on 3D fighters, and I just can't seem to wrap my head around Tekken, but it's definitely a solid game. And of course SNK are still doing good work, as they have always done when they've been actually working on fighting games as opposed to pachinko machines. But I just don't think that anything else currently in the contemporary fighting game space is on the level of FighterZ in terms of accessibility, in terms of polish and presentation, or in terms of just showing a lot of respect for a source material that it very clearly wants to get right, and does get right. And frankly, I think that there's nothing more fitting than that this game should come out, what is it, like a little less than a year after Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, and be a similar kind of idea of, you know, a big, bombastic, over-the-top fighting game full of fan service for a dumb franchise thing, and have it just do it so much fucking better than Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite does. Like, Marvel is basically dead at this point. It has been utterly destroyed by the advent of FighterZ. I was listening to the Super Best Friend cast, and apparently Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite recently got as low as 40-something players on Steam concurrently. That is, I mean, that is a dead fucking fighting game right there. Like, I would not be surprised if Infinite just never got a chance at EVO, because it's already dead now. And frankly, it doesn't deserve a chance at EVO. A lot of people would say, oh, but it's a Capcom fighter. Capcom are the kings of fighting games. Obviously, the Capcom fighter has to be at EVO, and a while ago, I would have agreed. Capcom used to be really fucking good at making fighting games, and they used to be genuinely the kings of it. That is not the case anymore. Right now, they've got two fighting games out, Street Fighter V and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite plays pretty well, apparently. I haven't touched it myself, but goddamn does it just really fall flat in terms of presentation, in terms of having a good amount of content, in terms of not nickel and diming the player, and very much in terms of feeling like something that was given a shit about. It really doesn't feel like there's any passion in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. It mostly feels like a lot of it was just kind of corporate mandates from Disney about what the Marvel brand is now, and that you can feel that when you look at it. You know, you look at the package and you're like, ugh, this feels kind of slimy. I don't like it. I don't want my Marvel game to be on message. I want it to be hype. I want it to be fun. I want it to be some fucking dumb bullshit that's not even remotely canon, but that's fine because it's fucking fun. And that is not what Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite gives you, at least not in terms of its content. Again, I hear that it plays pretty well. And then aside from Infinite, you've got Street Fighter V, which I like Street Fighter V. I enjoy the game. I've been playing Laura for a few months now. I like playing it. It's a fun game. That said, the amount of problems with this game, many of which were recently addressed with the Arcade Edition update, but many of which still remain completely unaddressed, is just unacceptable, frankly. Like, it is ridiculous how much Capcom have continued to fumble this game ever since release, and have, again, they've taken steps towards fixing things. They added arcade mode, you know, fucking at the beginning of the third year of the game's lifespan, Jesus fucking Christ, and they finally overhauled the UI so that it doesn't look fucking shit anymore, but it's really too little too late. Like, they have not fixed a lot of the core issues with the game, such as the fact that shit just hurts way too much, and it makes it way too easy for comebacks to happen to the point where they don't feel important anymore because they're just always happening. They haven't addressed the fact that there's a lot of input lag, and apparently that's largely due to the Unreal Engine, but I'm sure that there is something that they could do about it. I mean, they're fucking Capcom. They have the budget to be able to put a team on this and get it fixed if they would prioritize it, which they clearly aren't doing so. It's really just a case of Street Fighter V has the core of a good game. It is still Street Fighter at its heart, and Street Fighter is still my favorite fighting game franchise. The core mechanics that invented fighting games are there, and they're good mechanics, but all of what's surrounding them in this package is just lackluster and feels... Again, it feels like there was no passion for it. It feels slimy and corporate and gross, and I don't like it. Again, I like the game overall, and I enjoyed it, but I probably am not going to be playing it very much now that FighterZ is out, because why would I play an inferior fighting game when the only reason that I was even staying with Street Fighter V in the first place was just the fact that it's relevant. People play that game. It has a player base. I can go on and hop on ranked and consistently get matches, which I can't do in Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I can't do that in Skullgirls all the time. I can't do that in King of Fighters 2002. These games, you know, they don't have the dedicated online community that a current relevant fighting game would, and that is really what has been keeping me at Street Fighter V, is just I can get matches. But now Dragon Ball FighterZ is out. It's super relevant, and it completely dwarfs the player base of every other game on the market. I mean, Dragon Ball FighterZ had more players on launch day currently playing at the same time than Tekken 7 had at its absolute peak. Like, on launch day there were 44,000 players all playing Dragon Ball FighterZ at the same time. The most that Tekken 7 had at any given point, in all playing at once on Steam, was about 18,000. And Tekken 7 in turn dwarfs Street Fighter V, and Street Fighter V in turn dwarfs Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. So what reason do I have to play Street Fighter V now that there is a much better game out, which also has much more of an active player base that I can more consistently get matches in? There's absolutely no argument that can be made for why I should continue to play Street Fighter V. And there's no argument that can be made for why anyone should bother with Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. And there's absolutely not a single goddamn argument to be made for why Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite should be at EVO and why Dragon Ball FighterZ shouldn't take its spot. It's just, there's no argument. There just isn't. So that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that this big rush of player base for an ArcSys game can get them main stage at EVO, which can in turn snowball into just general good things for this company, because they have been putting in the legwork. They have been working hard and making fantastic fighting games for fucking years. They've been working at this for so long, and they have never gotten as much recognition as they deserve, and they are finally starting to get that. And I really, really hope that it can continue, because they so very much deserve it. If you haven't already, please buy Dragon Ball FighterZ. It's a great fucking game. If you have any interest at all in fighting games, definitely pick it up, because it is the way to get in. And I would just highly, highly recommend supporting it monetarily, because frankly, it deserves it.